Hey everybody, it's Paula here, obviously your musculoskeletal specialist, and it's January, March 2024, and I'm excited that today we've got someone that I've been busting to get some information from, because he's kind of really been around in the industry for quite a long time. You'll have heard of his name, unless you've been hiding it under a rock for the last 40 years, but his name is Walt Fritz. He's from America, and he's got an incredible history of being a devotee in one anomaly and then kind of reading through and extrapolating what it kind of means as touch therapists, and how we have maybe for bottom up versus top down things to consider in our patients' health and well-being. So, Walt, I'd love you to come on board and let's have a great chat and unpack everything that you've got to say about work around the throat and also work on perceptual togetherness of touch.
Hello.
Oh, great to see you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, no, and apologies. This is take two because we had a time mix up a couple of weeks ago. So I'm glad that we actually got together.
Half a world away, we'll do that.
I know. Oh, excellent. And we've got one of my mentor students who is here. Top of the morning to you, Belinda. Good to see you. Well, just before we start on this, I always like to plug the Q Academy, which is one of our Queensland-based education platforms. So they teach face-to-face, they teach online, and they teach supported a mixture of both part-time and full-time for students in and around Australia, and starting to look at students from overseas. The beauty of Q Academy is it not only does its diploma, but it also does myotherapy, and we're looking at including an associate degree down the future, which is very, very exciting. So if you want accelerated learning, or if you're thinking about going from a Cert 4 and up into a diploma, or from a diploma to a myotherapist, contact Q Academy, because they are brilliant and they have great ways to learn. You actually learn smart and fun, not boring and dumb. So enjoy them. Anyway, I'll be chatting about them later. Walt, good to see you. For people who have been hiding under that rock for a couple of decades, how long have you been in the industry, and what's your journey? What have you been doing?
Okay, so I've been a physical therapist since 1985, dark ages, long before evidence-based practice became the mandate in the physical therapy profession. And I say that because my education, I guess, was one that critical thinking was not highly stressed back in the early 80s, at least the way it is now, and at least the way I understand it now. And I kind of did my PT career like a lot of PTs. You're hopping around doing different things, hospitals. I did a lot of early intervention with birth to 5 children with disabilities, that sort of thing. But then in the early 90s, I got my arm twisted to take a myofascial release class. And within a couple months of that, a craniosacral class. And it really like shifted my trajectory considerably. I really liked it a lot. It was different, very different from what I'd learned in college, and very different from what I'd been doing, working in those early jobs. And I kind of went, head first down the rabbit hole with Alice. And I took everything that was available. I ended up aligning more with the myofascial release. I liked the little bit more freedom, and not quite, the leash wasn't so tight on a beginner. I took everything that was offered. I enthusiastically jumped headfirst into it, even though I wasn't in private practice. I was applying it with kids. I was applying it with my home care patients in physical therapy, and I really enjoyed it. It was unique work, and the model that I learned in made us feel unique too. Like we had sort of the keys to the kingdom of secret knowledge. And I don't want to overstate that, but I also don't want to understate it. It really was about empowering me to think that, I know things that other people don't. I know secrets of the fascia, secrets of the body, all these things. And, I sucked it up like a thirsty kitten. And I I became one of those guys that just was all everything was seen through fascial, sunglasses.
Yeah.
And that was my formative years. I worked for John Barnes, a physical therapist who I learned from. I worked for him for 10 years as an assistant. So I knew the model really well. And then I left for a number of reasons. And that's what started me on this journey that I think I'm probably here on your show for, not because I was a myofascial release guy, but maybe because I'm an ex-myofascial release guy.
Oh, do you know what? You're here because I've seen you around for as long as I've been around. I've been here for 28 years. And I thought, no, damn it. You just sound like you've got a really cool story. And it's the journey of all of us. So like John Barnes, like I remember I was listening to I think they're called the Biosintegrity parties, and listening to some of the stuff with him. He was crucified because he didn't have the evidence behind him. I remember that, but then he's kind of, the evidence is caught up to his work. So I kind of felt really sorry for him. And I remember reading, did he write The Endless Web? Is that Barnes' work?
Yeah. That's not him, but I've got the book right behind me here. Yeah.
Yeah, I've got it down here too somewhere.
Yeah.
If we're talking about myofascial release work, we're still working at a more, I find that that's more peripheral up. It's how the body is sensing the movements that we do. There's in stimulation mechanoreceptors in whatever way that looks like. We're getting changes at the autonomic nervous system, which means that we're affecting the body at a touch sense.
Right. Yeah. Let me back up a bit, because when someone says I do myofascial release, I want to know, what does that mean to you, right? Because to me, doing myofascial release was both what I did with my hands, right? But it was also what I did with my brain, thinking that my hands were selective for fascia, which is kind of how I was taught this work. And, that's really problematic from a research perspective, from an evidence perspective, because thus far, we've not shown that we can actually affect fascia in the way that fascists talk about, right? In terms of changing, through all these different properties. And it used to be piezoelectric effect. Now it's mechanotransduction and et cetera, et cetera. I still feel like what I do with my hands looks like myofascial release, right? At least the way that Barnes taught it to me, because there's all different forms. And that's problematic in and of itself. We're using a title, but you watch people work and it's like, wait a minute, you're doing something totally different from me, but you're relying on the same sort of that rather historic level of evidence to say that's why we're able to affect fascia. I really take issue with that. I was actually invited last year, talk about contentious, Paula. I was invited last year to present at the Third World Congress of Fascia. And I got an email from one of the organizers who said, we'd love you to present on fascia. And well, the first thing I said in my email was kind of rude. And I said, have you ever even looked at my website? Have you seen that I don't believe that I or you can single out fascia to say that it's the fault of why the person's having a problem, nor do I think that we can actually single out get rid of the rest of the structure and say, I'm only affecting fascia. So basically they accepted my proposal to teach a class about seeing the forest for the trees, to say, can we really treat fascia alone, singly, when we're treating a human being? And that's, in a nutshell, that's my belief right now, that somehow we've gotten led by the nose that it's all about the fascia or the muscle or the trigger point or whatever when we're working with a human being and not tissue.
So do you think that John Barnes and or the other people who have been the promoters of myofascial release techniques, do you think that they were only saying that we were affecting fascia and nothing else?
Well, I can tell you in the early 90s, that was the way it was presented. I've been out of that market since 2006, is when I kind of left the myofascial release community. And I kind of peripherally keep up with some of the fascial research. And, there's some really cool research coming out about humans, including their fascia, right? but I'm still waiting for that paper that says it's fascia that we're locally at the peripheral level changing, and not this complex combination of, as you said, bottom-up factors. Because I remember Robert Schlepp's paper in 2003. He talked about the mechanoreceptors, right? He talked about Ruffini's, right? Ruffini mechanoreceptors, but he omitted one huge fact, is that Ruffini's aren't just in fascia. They're in skin. They're in other tissues as well. So somehow we put these blinders on and we look for just the fascial explanation when really it's the human explanation.
Yeah.
I'm not up on the latest in fascial research, and I'm going to be the first to admit that. But I would think that by now, if there's been a paper that says, look, when we do this, we've shown it, we can affect fascia as the primary target without a nervous system influence.
Yeah.
Bringing the nervous system in, then why are we talking about fascia as if it's somehow the most important?
Yeah,
and unfortunately, I think that's what fascial work continues to do.
Yeah. And I think it's almost impossible it is impossible that you can't separate fascia and the nervous system. And I don't think you can separate the lymph system from that either.
Or the muscles, or the skin, or literally anything, right? When I touch a person, I'm touching a human being and not their muscle, right? We cannot isolate a muscle and you can't treat the diaphragm in isolation without a scalpel. But yet we talk of it like we can. We talk of it like, oh, it's a biceps problem. No, it's in the region of the bicep, right? But I just think that our education has let us down when it comes to that.
So talking about education, I was thinking about this when I was walking up one of the hills this morning. How do you see the colleges being able to change the current way that they are educating to make this? Because I agree with you. I think we make changes from the second that patient signs the consent form, or even beforehand.
Yep.
They've made a booking. Their intent is wellness, and they respect your professional capacity to be part of that circuitry. And I think that's where it actually starts. But how do you teach that?
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, I also think that they hand over so much power to us as a result of what you just said, that they're willing to basically believe what we say because they hope that we can help them. And unfortunately, and you know what, it works out for most of us, right? But I just think that the nature of our education is one of a skewed power dynamic, where the therapist is put on this pedestal and the patient is put on, the patient sitting down or laying down, and we are the person who knows the body. And we do know the body. Don't get me wrong, but I think that educational models, and whether it's college-based educational models or please continuing education models, has to up their game to realize, stop teaching people that a person's pain is solely due to a trigger point. It's just, it's so outdated. And start really looking at the behavioral aspect, the psychological aspect, the interpersonal aspect, in addition to the anatomy and the physiology. And I think that's really what needs to happen. And unfortunately, at least in the United States, most massage education, it's only 500, 800 hours. That's not enough time to get a fully grounded background in that. And, that's where they rely on continuing education here in the States. And I tell you, continuing ed here in the United States is like the Wild West. It's like anything goes, anything gets approved. And the ones with the biggest sales pitch are the ones who bring the most people in. And that's what people go out and tell people. So educationally, I think we need to advance beyond, it's just about this single thing.
Yeah, exactly. And it's really tricky on that if we're looking at research-based outcomes, clinical evidence, evidence-based models. How do you work with, like we say, all right, so we don't have absolute data on fascia response. There is actually some stuff coming out from Carla Stecco of the 11th Interdisciplinary Congress on Lower Back and Hip, and both Robert and Carla Stecco were presenting, and she had some really interesting stuff where they were looking at hormone changes with fascial stuff. So maybe there is some kind of links to research that can say A equals Z. Who knows? And I'm going to find that paper and throw it to you, because it was actually quite interesting. While I think about it, guys, if you've got questions that you want to ask of Walt, please, it's not just he and I banging on for an hour. It's this is your opportunity to say, I don't believe you, Walt.
You're too contentious. You're too contentious. I'm not going to let you live that down, Paula, for calling me contentious, but
he's contentious. But whack him in the comments so that we can get some more stuff going.
Yeah, I think that, and I know we talked about this before we came on the air. I think this contentious aspect is really good for us as professions, but also for us as individuals to realize that, you know what, we don't know everything. No matter how much we've learned, no matter how many degrees or years of experience, I walk into the room as 50% of what happens with the patient, because they bring their lived experience, they bring their history, their beliefs, and I believe that we need to honor that in a way that's not taught in our education or our continuing education, by elevating patient perspectives to a level that basically is truly equal with us. And a lot of people really get nuts about that. And because it's like, well, wait a minute, they don't know what's going on with the body. I do. And there's truth to that, but you don't know what's going on in that person.
And if I'm going to unpack that,
what's that?
Yeah, and if I'm going to unpack that more, I'm going to say, I was last interview was with Susan Lowell de la Soloranzo. God, I'm terrible at that name. Anyway, she was saying that 50% are coming in, and your touch is going to affect that clinical outcome or the experience for that patient. So it's not just what's happened to them today, what's happened to them on the way here. Have they had a negative impact coming in to see you? But it's the baggage that you bring in too.
Yeah. I just, in the work that I do, the work that I teach, the writing I do, I really look not just at the physical aspects of touch and all the stories that we tell about what we're doing to the problem, but I look at how that, from the psychological research, what happens when we touch somebody? What does that activate in a person's brain when a safe, effective touch is initiated? And you know what? We might be affecting a muscle out here in the periphery or the fascia, but as soon as I touch somebody, as soon as they recognize that as ideally a safe touch, a therapeutic touch, then that kicks in all these other higher centers that are completely capable of creating change as well. I work in this weird field that a lot of therapists don't, with voice and swallowing and speech pathologists. And they're so used to doing interventions that are not touch-based. And, they teach somebody a strategy for more efficient swallowing, and the person does that without any touch. But yet, as soon as we touch and do that, we assume that there's a different mechanism of action going on. But in reality, I think the mechanism of actions of, for instance, exercise and manual therapies, not that they're identical, but there's a lot of shared mechanisms there, because it's up here in the patient's brain and not just in our magic hands.
We have our we have our physiotherapists in Australia. I'm not quite sure what it's like over there, but they have moved from the touch-based clinical practice to exercise and machine-based. So, you'd be hard-pressed to come in with say you've got a groin pain or lower back pain to a physio and have them actually do anything that is touch-based on you. And we're seeing tribes of patients turning to, or clients coming to us, because they're not getting that
the hands up. Yeah. In the United States, it's followed a very similar trend, where it's almost that manual therapies are actually being devalued as being lower value, of being dependency building, and any intervention has the potential to build dependency. Manual therapy can, so can exercise if we don't do it properly. I'm a more manual therapy-based physical therapist, and if somebody wants the exercise-based, I send them down the street to another physical therapist. I still believe in the value of movement, whether it's strengthening or exercise or quality movement, quality play. And that's what we're trying to get, is not their tissues looser. We're trying to get them back into life. So I incorporate that into my model, even though I use manual techniques as my primary means of communication.
Yeah. So you specialize in laryngeal and voice work. Is that your primary area that you're working on now?
Well, it's a primary area that I do in education. My practice here is head to toe traditional physical therapy. I do get more referrals for voice and swallowing issues, for breathing, for oral motor issues, that sort of thing. But also, I'm just a generalist here. I happened upon an invitation 11 years ago now to teach my first class to speech pathologists, along with an MD who did the intro. And since that point, it's been what's driven me. It's been my interest. I still appreciate the value of the whole work, but I kind of found my tribe now, I think. And I really enjoy this specialization.
Okay. So give me an understanding of, or an example. Have your treatment techniques changed since going from the old Walt's MFR to the
And now I just call it manual therapy. I tried to sterilize it a bit, and I just call it manual therapy. I'd like to go one step further and not even call it manual therapy. I like to call it Steve. Something that's so darn confusing that there's no preconceived notion of what I'm going to do with a patient, right? But that probably won't happen. That's one of my bad jokes. If you watched me from across the room, Paula, you would probably say, boy, that resembles MFR the way some people do it. And I completely acknowledge that. I learned this from Barnes and some other people surrounding that in terms of what to do with our hands. But what I'm realizing, it's much more than what we do with our hands. It's how we envelop that hands-on work. It's the words that come out of our mouth. It's the scene that we set. If I can just diverge for a moment, there's a researcher out of the University of Pittsburgh in Pennsylvania who's written papers on something called metatherapy. Metatherapy is essentially the therapy that surrounds our therapies. And she talked about that people come in thinking it's the technique that's the magic, balancing the pelvis, right? Whatever that is. And while that's part of it, it's how we as experienced clinicians then translate that whole story to the patient, right? And people come to a seminar and they say, oh, I want to learn this technique. It's like, well, there's a technique, but let's learn the conversation. Let's learn the interaction. And to me, that's what is a big change from what I used to do as an MFR therapist to what I'm doing now, both in my practice as well as what I do. I'm annoying to some people, actually to a lot of people, but I'm annoying to my patients because I ask so many questions. And sometimes they'll say, why are you asked? Shouldn't you know this stuff? Shouldn't you know what to do? And I say, I know a lot, but I don't know what you're feeling. I don't know what you're valuing. I don't know what you're afraid of. I need you as a part of this. And I think, Paula, that's probably the primary difference between me 15 years ago and me now is I stand as 50% of what happens in the room instead of 100%.
Okay. Because the questions that a therapist, you could, like, I ask a lot of questions, and there are many people who don't ask any, which is another bone of contention, I think. But what I think you were saying originally is that we would ask questions as I'm up here, so tell me about such and such, and yes, oh my God, oh well, that sounds like this is your problem. So you're actually you were working, well, not quite that aggressively, but from there.
Yeah.
And now, do you have? I'm just wondering about the A-type people that would find that you are less than. Oh, they maybe don't know what they're doing. So now I have a level of distrust in this work.
So what I have to do is let them know that I'm not certain. And the way I do that is I don't say, I don't know. If they ask me a question, like, well, what do you think is going on with me? What I do is I reflect on what they told me on their intake, right? My doctor told me that, fill in the blank, right? What I'll usually do is I'll turn that and use that as one of the possibilities, because I do not want to disrespect anybody who they trusted in the past or present, right? So it could be, Paula, that, you know, this problem in your neck is a bunch of trigger points, like your physician said, or, you know, another real plausible explanation based on today's evidence is it could be a neurologic remnant from an injury that your nervous system just hasn't let go of yet. So I let them know that I'm not certain, but I know enough to know that there's more than one explanation for everything.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'm happy with that answer, because I could see a lot of people kind of listening to this going, oh, hang on a minute, I don't think I want to go down that path, because I don't want to look at my patients. But that is a value added, because I agree with you. Couple of comments. One, Belinda was saying, I say to my clients that I cannot do this without you. It's a working partnership.
Yeah. Yeah. And I let them know, I actually tell people that if they don't help me, I stand less of a chance of helping them. Talk about incentivizing this process. I let them know that if they stay silent, I will treat them. I'll dislike it, but I'll treat them. But I'll stand a better chance if they actually partner with me in shared decision making.
Yeah. I remember teaching a course one time, and someone was adamant, eyes open on the clinic table. Don't allow your patients to have their eyes closed.
Why is that?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, because when their eyes were closed, they were reducing the peripheral information to the nervous system.
Could be. Yeah. Yeah. Never heard that. And I guess I don't even have an opinion. I just went, oh, that's interesting. Right.
Yeah.
I know that I don't close my eyes unless I'm really tired. I keep my eyes open because to me, nonverbals are so informative, right? We get that stoic patient who doesn't reveal anything, but sometimes you see those little cracks happening. And I'm a pest when it comes to those stoics. What do you feel? And I keep asking them, what are you feeling? And if they feel something, let's just use this, right? There's something going on in their face. And I'm doing my MFR type of evaluation. And I'm looking for those things that you and I and everybody else was taught to look for, right? We're looking for the crap. We're looking for the tightness. We're looking for whatever you call it, right? But instead of me saying, oh, I found your problem, Paula, what I'll say is either aloud or not aloud is I'll say, this feels interesting to me, Paula, but what do you feel? Does this feel relevant? Is this relatable? Is this something that you can feel like it's a part of your issue? And more than that, I put them in charge of deciding what I'm going to do or helping me. For instance, does it feel useful if I hold this stretch in this way, or should I go this way or this way? And I make them work.
How long is your clinic? How long do you have a session for?
My sessions are 50 minutes long.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. The reason I'm asking that is that sometimes you can have people that, like, if you ask, we have people here who talk forever, like as a therapist, and I go, oh man, you've actually got to learn to talk less. Like, don't be verbose.
Okay, so wait a minute. Let me be contentious for a second. What if this person, that is part of their process? If I let you know that the session is 50 minutes long, you talk to me about what you feel is important, because I mean, look at where we are. We are in such a unique situation of, I don't want to say intimacy in terms of sexual, but intimate safety, where a lot of times that language, that talking is so much more important possibly than what we're going to do with our hands, or maybe equally as important. I mean, there are times where I might try and redirect, but I also realize maybe this is part of the person healing, is by being able to tell me this.
Yeah. And my bad. I meant to say when the therapist won't shut up.
I'm sorry. Okay, so I went off at a tangent. I totally misunderstood you. Okay.
Yeah. No. Look, if they want to talk for an hour, it's because I kind of go, well, if this is a space you've got to talk for an hour, I've got to honor that, because you may not get that at home. You may not get that, or it's a safety mechanism because they don't want to acknowledge what's happening. And we need to be mindful of that space. Like, hang on a minute, Janice, it's time for you to shh and listen to your body. Don't listen to me, but I want you to listen to your body. And if it's giving you cues, can you let me know about those? Because they're important for me.
And I'm guessing you and I and everybody who's watching here, we all have our own way of redirecting. And my way of redirecting is, I'll wait for that sudden pause and I'll say, ooh, right there. What do you feel? I didn't necessarily feel anything, but it comes a break point. Like, what are you feeling right now? And they'll say, do you mean like right there? I'll say, well, maybe, but what do you feel right now? Right. And again, we all have our own way of redirecting, but I just think, I think a lot of clinicians really are bothered by the patient who talks a lot, or they should be if it's them talking a lot, right? But it's also what I find interesting, at least in a lot of groups on Facebook, is the therapist who feels like their patient is the controlling type. They want to tell them what to do, how long to spend in an area and everything. And they get so frustrated with that. And I look at that and I say, damn, that's like an ideal patient to me, who will actually share with me what I'm missing, like that might be able to better meet their needs and expectations. And I don't always open my mouth and be contentious, but sometimes I can stay quiet about it because I do understand that bothers some people. But to me, that's a patient being a part of the process that I invite them to be a part of.
What we have the patient that says, go harder. You can't go hard enough. Go deep. And there are therapists out there that do that, but I think that it's to their own peril for the tissue at the very limit. How do you manage those patients, given that the way you want to work is that you kind of go, all right, I'm going to honor your request. How do you?
Right. I have boundaries. I have safety professional boundaries that I won't exceed. But there's one thing that I teach at every class. I tell people at every class that I'm not treating myself. A lot of us treat our patients like we want to be treated ourselves. And if you like deep tissue, then you're going to be slamming people. If you like light work, you're going to be leaning towards that. I realize that if patients on my table, they're not me. So I'm willing to negotiate with them a level of pressure. I have my boundary, I have my limit, but I might be pushing my own buttons by going deeper than I would like. But if they're receiving satisfaction from it, I'm willing to explore that boundary. We all have ways to see if we can back off from that pressure, but I'm willing to negotiate that piece.
Yeah. Okay.
I still don't go all elbows, like I used to in MFR when we used to the pin and stretch and all that. I just don't do that anymore. Number one, it's hard on my body and I'm getting old. And number two, I want a different level of communication happening rather than biting on the pillow while I like run my elbow down their back, even if they think that's necessary.
Yeah, and it's so not necessary. But all you young people out there who have been treating for a long time, for like 2 seconds in the industry, you don't need to work that hard. Yeah. Like it's a learned skill. We learn techniques in college, and I remember, when we first started, we were given, that was 2 years, bang, hardcore, you have to do these techniques for this, which I guess is what you had back then. And then all of a sudden you have this, oh my God, I can actually put my hand on the tissue and make choices.
Yeah.
You couldn't make choices early in the piece.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm going to take a really quick break to talk about Q Academy and get somebody amazing who has been part of the process to let you guys know the benefits of Q. If you're in Australia or even if you're in Southeast Asia, you can check out this space because you can probably start getting some work with us and in the colleges ASAP.
My name is Jade Afu. I studied Cert 4 massage in 2014 and then went on to remedial in 2015. I was working in ASICs. I was retail, Lorna Jane. The real reason why I went and studied was my daughter was, she's been quite sick for about 7 years on and off. She's had a couple of chronic conditions. So I found it hard working in a job and having to leave because my children are sick or I've got to go to hospital or there's just so many things going on. For me, I needed another option. I've been set up for about 8 years now, working from home. Having a home business has been like such a blessing to my life. I I don't think I could have done what I've done somewhere else, just with my own circumstances. My life's very busy. I've got 3 kids. And this year has been a little bit different again because now I've got 3 kids playing sports every afternoon. So I do try, if I can, work in between school hours. I feel like you can make it work to your advantage. So you can either work as hard as you want and be stressed and all the things, or you can make it flexible.
Nice. So, welcome back. I love that you're not as, I thought you were wackedly contentious. You're limiting the massive
moderate, yeah.
But I do see on social media and also on some of the research things that papers, etc., that your comments will be, there's no proof of, so therefore it doesn't. Why? Okay, there's no actual proof, so it doesn't work. Is that?
No. My thing with the evidence is, if there's no evidence, let's use fascia right now, okay? If there's no evidence to say that, number one, fascia is the problem, and number two, that we can select fascia through a specific style of touch to change that fascial problem, why are we saying we are? Why are we acting like we are? Why do we continue to elevate the muscle, the nerve, the lymph, or whatever? Why do we keep doing that? And I know why it is, because it keeps getting promoted from the people we have to take continuing ed from. And I have obvious issues with continuing education model, at least in the United States. It's almost predatory in terms, and I don't care whether we're talking about muscle or nerve or whatever. We're treating a human being. I think that we should look at the evidence from a broader perspective, right? Instead of cherry picking evidence to try and prove our point. And I'm gonna draw you back to something you said really early. And here I go into a contentious mode. I don't think that the evidence is finally catching up to certain people. I think we're understanding the human condition better. It's, when you make a claim, I think we need some sort of a level of proof other than just happy patients, all right? And a lot of people put their patient outcomes as the evidence. And, oh man, patient outcomes matter, but can you figure out a credible way, not just within your own tribe, but outside the tribe, to describe what's happening in a manual therapy encounter that would be acceptable to the scientific community? And to me, that's the challenge that I put myself up for. And those are the kind of comments I make on social media. It's not about that we're not effective. We might be effective for different reasons than we think. And I think that's always the case, right?
Yeah. How do we /you research, like where does your research journey start? If that's the case, how do you?
I learned so much from, I use a small handful of papers that really broaden my perspective. And when we're done with this, if you can send me a reminder, I'll send you the links, the references for these papers. There's some papers done in the late 2010s by Joel Bialowski, by a researcher by the last name of Geri, Geri. And then there's a lovely paper by a researcher by the last name of Kolb, Kolb, who basically, his paper is basically saying, we know so much about the multifactorial effects of manual therapy. Why does our education model continue to teach us these single tissue stories? And it was starting from a foundation of that, which made me see like, oh, what about the behavioral aspects? What about the person's reaction when I touch them in terms of a top-down response, right? What about the effects of continuous touch on a person's brain connectivity and reactivity, right? To me, that was what opened my eyes. As long as I stayed in that MFR, the literature that they gave us, everything was pointing to fascia as the cause and the effect. But once you start opening your eyes to other people's models, and it could be somebody who's doing muscle-based work, right? It's like, wait a minute, they're doing similar things. How are they explaining it? And starting to broaden your understanding of the research beyond the tissues that we hold and cherish.
Yeah. My personal view is that we have been trying to compete with the physiotherapists and the other health professionals in our area, our allopathic practitioners. And the only way we've been trying to elevate where we stand is by providing research papers. So we're trying to fight against Cochrane peer-reviewed, double-blind studies, et cetera, that are coming from the allopathic community.
Right.
And I see that as part of why we've been putting these research papers together, because we're tired of having that community say massage doesn't work.
Unfortunately, I think there's a real divide in the research that is very common in manual therapy. The primary papers that we see are outcome-based studies, right? They do myofascial release on somebody for lateral epicondylitis, right? And they do the treatment and it helped the person's problems. And the improper conclusion is that, myofascial release is effective for that, when they're really showing that when we do certain things with our hands, right, that's what's helpful. What's lacking in all of these papers is a deeper understanding of the mechanism of actions. And that's what I'm trying to promote, in my classes, in my social media presence, is let's start really unpacking these mechanism of actions and realize that it's never, ever about one thing. It's never about a muscle just having a grumpy week, and that's why we need to massage it or do myofascial release on it, right? There's a nervous system, there's a human attached to that. And once we can move into broader understandings of the mechanisms of both causation as well as the remediation of it, we're going to be sort of locked in this dismissive type of profession where people look down on us. And I include myself in there, right? Now, in the United States, the physical therapy profession, or physio as it is in Australia, they're just as guilty of some other sins. I mean, the simplification of a person's pain as being due to weakness is just completely wrong. But yet, it's the common thing that patients come out of those sessions with. Oh, I need to strengthen my core. It's so much more than that. But we allow that person to leave our room with that overly simplistic and almost wrong explanation for why they're having pain. We've all got a lot of work to do, not just manual therapists, not just physios, right?
Yeah. Totally agreed. So if you were going to write a research paper, you'd be going, as I'm guessing, would be on a volume of clients that come to, or patients that come to see you with a condition, because that's what we normally look at, lower back or neck, and follow the dots. A series of 5 treatments lasting 50 minutes that included touch therapy.
I don't think we can get away from calling it something. I just think we could do that because it doesn't sell. I think you might be able to say a gentle stretching, manual therapy. But I think that when we're doing research, and whether it's you and I or other people, I think that intro section on every paper that talks about the problem and a little bit of, they'll reach into the past and they'll grab a study or a paper or a book that says the fascia has been seen to be implicated in these problems. But they really never explore that at all. And that's what I think should be the mandate for outcome-based papers, that they actually acknowledge that maybe the mechanisms aren't as accurate as we think they are. Those types of papers, Paula, that you just mentioned, 5 sessions of 50 minutes or whatever, and we did this, they're still necessary, right? But are they proving that myofascial release is effective? Or are they proving that when we put our hands on somebody, had an interaction, that it helped their pain?
Yeah. Okay. All right. So my brain can work with that. So we're still putting papers together, but we're not being limiting on the actual modality. What we're recognizing is that the joint is going from one position to a next position,
right?
Which is an improved quality. The felt experience by the patient has gone from a negative experience to a positive experience.
Yeah.
And the outcomes before returning to pain have gone from X to Y.
Yeah.
And we don't touch anything more about it.
I don't know that we'll ever be able to sort of divest ourselves from modality naming, right? I'm probably like you. I have Google Scholar alerts set up for manual therapy for all these different things, and I just see. This is gonna sound really disrespectful, but I see trash coming out in terms of what people are getting away with when it comes to being published. In terms of the things, the statements they make in those introductory concepts are just so, excuse me, archaic that nobody's holding a candle to that. Nobody's holding their feet to the fire to say, come on, you can do better than that. And I think that that's a real problem in our shared professions.
Yeah.
I can't ever see myself doing a research study like you just talked about. But my whole goal is, or in terms of the paper I just sent you that I just had published, it's just looking at the limitations in the current evidence, because there's so much conflicting evidence to say what happens when we touch. Can't we start acknowledging the broader body of mechanisms as part of the realistic aspect of what we're doing when we work with a patient?
So all right. So your task, if you choose to do it, is to take a longitudinal study of a volume of current research papers and write a review of, it'll be a lit review of why they're wrong.
Why they're not totally right. I think I would rather stick with it. And Paula, the paper that I just sent to you was, unfortunately, I was held to 2,500 words, which for me, I'm just getting started. I'm just finishing my introduction with 2,500 words. I couldn't pick apart individual papers, but I talked about the general trends. And for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, I just had a paper published in on laryngeal manual therapies for voice and swallowing. And it was about talking about time for an update in the mechanisms, right? And it was literally taking all these different concepts of what people think we're doing when we do laryngeal manipulation or trigger point word or myofascial release, and understanding that it's so much more than the issue in the tissues, that people just love to repeat that. It's an issue in the person, not in the tissue.
Yeah. But don't we love saying it's an issue in the tissue? Like it's,
yeah.
And it is actually, but it can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. There is an issue in the tissue, but it's reflected because of the entire person.
Right. And I don't want to get too annoying about it. I mean, we still have to talk in ways that patients can sort of package and walk away with, right? And if they're convinced that they've got an issue in their tissue, I'm not going to tell them, no, you don't. You have an issue in your brain. To me, that's so invalidating, right? But I'm going to let them know that there's a lot of different ways that people view those issues. And what we're going to do is, instead of picking one of those ways, we're going to try and encapsulate them all, but I'm going to include you in the process. And they look at us, what do you mean you're going to include me? And to me, that's where the education comes, of why it's so important that the patient is an active participant, not you zone out while I fix you.
Yeah. Okay. And well said. One of my pet beefs for a few years ago, we started having the whole, your pain is the nervous system, and at some stage it's now no longer pain here. It's actually your brain has hardwired that it's a problem with your brain, not with your body. And that is so dismissive of the person. Like that, how dare you now devalue my physical, how I feel every day, and tell me that it's just my brain, like that.
And I think a lot of people, when the whole pain science movement started about 10 years ago or whenever, they went all on the bandwagon and became really dismissive, not only of their patients, but of other clinicians. And, maybe I'm just too diplomatic, even though it doesn't sound like I am here, but realizing that everybody's got feelings, everybody's got emotions, everybody's got an investment in these things. It's like, you know what? It's the person, and, the brain is up here, but the nervous system is everywhere. And they're still fighting about these things on Facebook about, is it in the brain or is it not? And it's like, to me,
centralized model as a peripheral. That's
it's less important than the relationship that I can build with my patient, rather than trying to set them straight.
Yeah. I read something somewhere, like in the last 5 days, they were talking about the homunculus, and if people have got chronic pain, that just simply working on the hands, the feet, the face, the scalp,
Mhm.
because of the connections of how much sensation is in the brain in those areas, can actually do a lot to just reduce that level of stress and that. Just think about, I don't know, well, you're probably a bad example, but when you go to the hairdresser and they do that
I take offense to that. I remember that.
scalp massage, you're not very blonde up there, like this, the skin looks pretty normal, but they do that scalp massage and you hear people in there go,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's
And that's
so
okay. So here I go off on the limb again. It's like craniosacral is an entire industry built on the thought that we're doing things that nobody outside the curriculum believes or can prove, right? But we're also doing incredibly soft, affective touch. How can you separate the potential of influencing the sutures with that autonomic downregulation that happens when somebody touches us in a safe, soft, effective way, right?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, when we start talking about those on individual tribal Facebook groups, man, you're just going to get booted from that. And I get booted from groups all the time, trust me, for saying things like I just said right there, you know?
Oh, but it's true. I mean, like you can't. How have we got the right to say it's one thing? Like my treatment focus is always going to be on the nervous system. That's just the path that I followed.
Yeah.
I'm not disregarding anything else, but that is probably my pathway of least resistance for me.
Yeah. There's a lovely paper that I'll send you to, 2017 by Sarah Telly. It was the effects of continuous touch on brain activation. And to me, it doesn't prove why a slower, steadier touch is more effective, but it potentially shows why it might be differently effective. And basically, I'm not going to summarize the study because it takes about 5 minutes to do, but basically the longer the clinician simply touched a person, the more the activation center, the attentive centers of the patient's brain essentially opened up to the point where 15 minutes was the peak in openness of those activation centers, right? And the activation centers are part of what creates change. And then after 15 minutes, the gates sort of slowly close. And to me, Paula, that's the kind of research that, you know, if you're not careful, you'll use it to defend your model, right? But to me, it's saying, well, here's why longer touch may be differently effective. And that's the kind of research that I look for now, really more than, you know, somebody comparing MFR with craniosacral, stuff like that, because to me, they're meaningless concepts.
Yeah. It's quite like that.
Yeah.
So what are we doing in, like you said, when I'm teaching courses and stuff like that? What are you teaching? And have you got, are you doing books as well, or is it just research papers? This is the filthy plug. Manual therapy for voice and swallowing.
Yep. Came out last year. It's what I did during COVID. I teach basically every other weekend in the United States and abroad. I was just over in Taiwan in February or January for a couple of weeks. I get to teach in the UK a lot. We're teaching in Japan and Hong Kong later this year. Anyway, the primary class that I teach is my manual therapy for voice and swallowing disorders. I get a fair amount of physios and massage therapists at that class, in addition to speech therapists. I had moved again during COVID, whenever, you know, we had all this time to do all these things. I moved the classes that I was teaching to massage therapists and PTs onto an online format. I might start carving some of those out live again. All of my classes, all of my teaching, all of my work is about manual therapy from a shared decision-making perspective. I just, if you're interested, I just posted a video today that we shot in Taipei. They brought in a professional singer to be as a demo during one of our classes, and she had some voice problems and all. And I put that up there, because it's kind of a cool demo, because she sings at the end and she not only sounds great, but she talks about the difference that she felt, not her, right? And it's all about the felt sense of it. But what I really like is how the videos that I try to put up there show that it's not Walt, this miracle worker, passing hands over, right? It's about using touch as a form of communication and getting the patient to then begin to communicate with me about whether it feels effective. And I love it. I absolutely adore it when I'm doing something and the patient moves my hand to a different spot.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of people get their ego bruised when it comes to that. To me, that is the absolute epitome of what I'm looking for from a patient who feels that they have enough value to say, no, you're missing it. Go right here, right?
Yeah.
And that's how I think our therapy should work instead of being so, clinician based.
Yeah, prescriptive.
Yeah.
And yeah, exactly. I mean, and like there's a lot of held positions that you'll kind of go, oh, you'll be in a space and you'll naturally go, this doesn't feel like it's in the right spot. Do you need me to move half a centimeter or a quarter of an inch or like I feel like I'm kind of there, but does that feel there to you?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's the language around that. The vocabulary of shared decision making is actually, I think, more challenging to newcomers than learning the actual hands-on work. It's because to me that's well, maybe because I've been doing it for 30 plus years, right? It gets easy to us, right? But people come into my class and it's like they're just thrown off when I ask them to start asking questions and then basing your treatment off of the answers to those questions. It's so much easier to work in a vacuum, which is unfortunately, it's not necessarily how we were taught, but it's the message that comes across in a lot of the way we were taught.
And people don't want to have to think. Oh my God, if I have to ask those questions and I have to think about what I'm going to do, and I'm busy, mate. I've got 12 patients today and I don't have time to spend asking them questions. And you hear that from practitioners.
But if any of your listeners here are interested, go to my YouTube page or my website and just watch some of the videos to see how shared decision making can work in terms of not just what we do with our hands, but what we do with our language, what we do with communication and awareness and nonverbals, et cetera. Because to me, that's the embodiment of the approach that I teach. And if I leave this earth, passing along nothing more, I think that would be it about the value of incorporation of shared decision making in our manual therapy models.
Yeah. And that sounds like a perfect way to finish, but we're not. Because I want to ask questions. I'm in a choir and we do all our trills and our articulations and stuff. But are there any self-activation? Is there anything that the choir can do to assist themselves with manual? Because we don't ever talk about manual. We talk about the tip of the tongue, the teeth, the lips, teeth, the tongue.
Right. I teach a lot of self-work. In fact, I think we all teach a lot of self-work. And trying to say, okay, here's something that a singer could or should use, I think is kind of missing the point because we'd want to make it unique for the individual. We get a lot of singers with tongue tension, right? Or tongue fatigue, that sort of thing. We do a lot of tongue manual therapy in the classes, tongue pulls, but pulls are a gross overstatement. Tongue engagement, tongue holding, but also we've begun incorporating some really interesting combinations of like tongue compression, where you put your thumb literally on top of the patient's tongue with a bit of gauze and press it down. And then you ask them to start elevating their tongue, pushing up against your resistance, or the opposite, putting your finger to the roof of their mouth and then having them come up and capture your finger and then push down against it. It builds awareness. And people like to say, well, it makes a stronger tongue. Yeah, but it's not by lifting a barbell, right? You're building strength by awareness. And what's so interesting is those tongue engagements carry right over into swallow mechanism because the tongue's an active component with swallowing. So I know I didn't really answer your questions. I actually have a sub channel on my YouTube page with some self type of work for these sorts of things we're talking about here.
And that's exactly what I'll get. I'll throw that link to them for that subgroup, and that's perfect. There was one little thing that I heard from Emrys Goldsworthy yesterday. He was talking about the vagal nerve and its effect on throat and poor neck biomechanics. And it's just another one of those, don't put it only with muscle. Don't put it only with fascia, because we've so many other things that are involved in that space.
Well, the recurrent laryngeal nerve innervates so much of the vocal mechanism, and that's an offshoot of the vagus nerve right there. So you've got those connections, right? It's a motor nerve off of the vagus. But can I just put my editorial comment in for a minute? I think the vagus nerve is so hot right now. Are we making the vagus nerve the next fascia, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I think it's more autonomics than it is purely vagal, right? It's important. It's worth looking into, and there's some wonderful research, but it's just like, it's the next things, it's the next big thing coming right now. Just my opinion.
Oh no, and you forgot the psoas that was in there as well, between myofascial.
Exactly. No, psoas is old. We're not worrying about that anymore.
Yeah, screw the psoas. It's the iliacus if you're talking about anything, and psoas is only a back stabilizer. But let's not go there. We've knocked an hour off really, really simply, and it's amazing how fast it comes. There was a few people that made comments, but more just about orthobionomy, talking about that nervous system and the modelling that works when you're talking about your interaction with your patient or your client. Lenski sends lots of loves and hearts and kisses, but hopefully, many thanks have to go. You're welcome, and we will send out the links for some of those papers. And I'll try to send maybe your paper as well. If we can get that little one on that PDF of yours, that would be brilliant as well. And I'll pop in try to get some links as well for you with regards to the YouTube, your channel. But Walt, thank you so much. I don't think you're anywhere near as contentious as I thought you were.
I didn't think you were any more as confrontational as I thought you were going to be. So there you go. No, I really had a great time. Thanks so much for having me, and I'm glad it worked out. And I want to encourage people, if they have any questions, or if they want to throw things at me, through the phone or whatever, just feel free to contact me through my website. I love talking about this work. I love talking about the conflicts that we all face, because I think together it gets easier to work our way through these than everybody working in isolation.
Agreed, completely. Wasn't the pandemic a wonderful thing? It's brought us all together.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Walt. Next month, I'm not quite sure who I've got lined up. There's a few people in the bandwagon, so I'm not going to let the cat out of the bag yet. But have a great month. If you've got any questions or queries, please feel free to shoot messages on, tag Walt or tag myself, and have a beautiful life, everybody. See ya.